Tigers. I'm your main host, Heidi Barrios.
Jayden Fernandez.
I'm Khrislenn Garino.
And welcome to this week's episode on Black History Month.
Yes,
Woo! Let's go.
We celebrate Black History Month, although I know who is part of this morning, and I know that we celebrate Black History Month in January, in March, in April, and all year round.
Okay, first and foremost, how did Black History Month come to be? Okay, heads up. The original association name and the original name for celebrating African Americans, it's not N-word bad, like, you know what I'm talking about, but it doesn't roll off our tongues easily, so please bear with us. The terminology is historically accurate. According to AfricanAmericanHistoryMonth.gov and ASALH.org, Harvard-trained historian Carter G. Woodson believed that truth could not be denied and that reason would prevail over prejudice. His hopes to raise awareness of African Americans' contributions to civilizations was realized when he and the organization he founded, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, or ASNLH, conceived and announced Negro History Week in 1925. Woodson built Negro History Week around traditional ways of commemorating the Black past. He was asking the public to extend their study of Black history, but not to create a new tradition.
Well, this event was first celebrated during a week in February 1926 that encompassed the birthdays of both Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. The response was overwhelming. Black history clubs sprang up, teachers demanded materials to instruct their pupils, and progressive whites, not simply white scholars and philanthropists, they stepped down forward to endure the efforts. By the time Woodson's death in 1950, Negro History Week had become a central part of African American life, and substantial progress had been made in bringing more Americans to appreciate their celebration. The Black Awakening of the 1960s dramatically expanded the consciousness of African Americans about the importance of Black history, and the Civil Rights Movement focused Americans of all colors on the subject of the contributions of African Americans to our history and culture.
The celebration was expanded to a month in 1976, the nation's bicentennial. President Gerald R. Ford urged Americans to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. 50 years after the first celebration, the association held the first African American History Month. Now, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, or ASALH, continues to promote the study of Black history all year.
But we have to get back to the original roots. The importation and enslavement of Africans marked the beginning of the Black experience in America. In 1808, there was a ban on the import of slaves. In 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Lincoln officially ended slavery. However, in his first inaugural address in early 1861, he declared that he had, quote, no purpose directly or indirectly to interfere with slavery in the states where it exists, end of quote. In 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation was confirmed by the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, which outlawed slavery and involuntary servitude.
In 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson established a policy of separate but equal accommodations for African Americans. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The case of Brown v. the Board of Education of Topeka presented Thurgood Marshall overturned Plessy v. Ferguson. It was an important step in initiating integration. In 1957, the governor of Arkansas attempted to prevent 9 Black students from entering Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. President Eisenhower sent federal troops to enforce the court order. The Civil Rights Act of 1957 protected the freedom of African Americans to vote.
In 1960, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation was illegal in interstate bus and train stations. A group of citizens called Freedom Riders tested this ruling by traveling throughout the southern portion of the country on buses. The Freedom Riders encountered violence in Alabama, and President Kennedy intervened to ensure their safety. In 1962, President Kennedy sent federal troops to the University of Mississippi so that rioters would not prevent James Meredith, the school's first Black student, from attending.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 forbade discrimination in public places and by any program that receives federal government funding. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 also established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, a U.S. government agency that takes employment discrimination complaints into court, in an effort to enforce laws that prohibit job discrimination. The Voting Rights of 1965 suspended the use of voter qualification tests, creating a sharp increase in Black voter registration. These tests had been used to disqualify African Americans from their voting rights.
And now that you know some historical roots of Black History Month, we're going to talk about important people related to the topic. So the first one is Ella Baker. Baker was an important early advisor to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She was also a part of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the Southern Christian Leadership Council, or SCLC. Baker believed that civil rights activism should be focused on individual African American communities. The next person is Stokely Carmichael. Carmichael supported the ideas of Black Power and is known as the originator of the term. He became the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1966 and incorporated Black Power into the civil rights group. He also aligned with the Black Panther Party. He also wrote a book titled Black Power with Charles Hamilton. Medgar Evers. Evers was the first field secretary of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
Now, here's a name you've heard before, I'm sure. I'm sure you guys have all heard of him.
Yes.
And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination.
MLK Jr. is considered the most prolific leader in the civil rights movement. He was a founder of the aforementioned SCLC and was known for his nonviolent approach towards ending discrimination. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington in 1963, a demonstration of 250,000 people to promote civil rights. The next year, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. His birthday is now celebrated as an official U.S. holiday on the third Monday of January. Thurgood Marshall became the first African American justice of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1967. Marshall was the chief counsel for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People from 1938 to 1950.
The next person you might already know also. Her name is Rosa Parks. Parks is credited with the launch of the bus boycotts. This protest by the Black community occurred after she violated a city ordinance in refusing to give her seat to a white man on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. The buses were desegregated over a year later. The next person is Malcolm X. X was born Malcolm Little. He changed his name after being released from prison and joining the Nation of Islam, which was led by Elijah Muhammad, who believed in Black separatism. Later, he left the NOI and started the Organization of Afro-American Unity.
So now that we have highlighted some important people related to the topic, we're also going to highlight some LGBTQ plus people in Black history. First and foremost is Marsha P. Johnson, an involvement leader, trans activist, and co-founder of the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR, and a prominent figure in the Stonewall Uprising of 1969. Marsha spent her life organizing alongside other visionary activists to provide critical housing support and encouragement to LGBTQ youth and sex workers experiencing homelessness. She is most known for her trademark top and hat tuxedo. Bentley was also Harlem's most famous lesbian figure by the early 1930s, and for a time was among the best known Black entertainers in the United States. After decades of success, Gladys was pushed out of the entertainment industry in an increasingly conservative and oppressive society, and was eventually forced to hide who she was in order to perform and survive. the lasting impact she has had on music and in the entire entertainment industry is undeniable.
Next, we have Bayard Rustin, if I'm saying that correctly. He was a Black gay civil rights activist and leader, best known for organizing the March on Washington 1963, aka the one we mentioned earlier, which is one of the largest nonviolent protests ever held in the US.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
This event, like I said earlier, is where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech, and it was considered instrumental in the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the National Voting Rights Act of 1965. Miss Major, according to MissMajor.net, she is a Black transgender activist who has fought for over 50 years to create a better world for her trans, gender, or just gender non-conforming community. Major is a veteran of the infamous Stonewall riots, a former sex worker, and a survivor of Dannemora Prison and Bellevue Hospital's Queen Tank. Her global legacy of activism is rooted in her own experiences, and she continues her work to uplift transgender women of color, particularly those who have survived incarceration and police brutality.
Now, onto another major topic, which is the civil rights movement. And the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, defined by learningtogive.org, was, quote, an era dedicated to activism for equal rights and treatment of African Americans in the United States. During this period, people rallied for social, legal, political, and cultural changes to prohibit discrimination and end segregation, end quote. So you might be wondering, or a question in my brain that popped up while we were like looking up all this information, and it's how many states, I guess, require the teaching about civil rights movement or like talk about slavery, or if it's like sugar-coated or not.
Because where do we live? The Bay Area, the West Coast.
California. If you look on like, if like on TikTok and all that stuff, like you see it, and some people are like, we don't know nothing.
Right.
And it's like, really?
How do you not know?
Yeah, because like it's been taught to us since very young, or at least like slavery has when we were young, because don't want to put too much on the little kids. It's always education is important. Yeah. But here's what I found. According to CBS's 2-month-long investigation on how the civil rights movement is taught throughout our country, quote, CBS News found that 7 states do not directly mention slavery in their state standards, and 8 states do not mention the civil rights movement. Only 2 states mention white supremacy, while 16 states list state rights as a cause of the Civil War. Let me finish. Before we even start talking. Examples. Here's some examples. In Massachusetts, the social studies standards mention slavery and enslaved people more than 60 times. In 3rd grade, students are expected to learn that, quote, colonial Massachusetts had both free and enslaved Africans in its population, end quote. 2 grades later, students are asked to grapple with slavery, the legacy of the Civil War, and the struggle for civil rights for all.
In New Hampshire, the state standards simply mention the word slavery and racism as part of a thematic lesson about social and race relations. While New York's social studies state standards span more than 150 pages and offers details on teaching the development of slavery as a racial institution, Delaware's social studies standards are just 5 pages long, and they focus on developing skills like comparing competing historical narratives.
As for the states that do not or only briefly mention slavery or the civil rights movement, Dr. Tina Hefner, president of the National Council for the Social Studies, said that this does not necessarily mean students are not learning about these topics.
Then how are they learning about these topics?
Yeah, I don't know. You tell me, because it's whack in my opinion.
That does not make sense to me.
It doesn't.
I don't get it because you're trying to teach, like, let's say, like, because us junior year, we learn about, at least here in our school, our district, we learn about American, like, U.S. history. Teachers or the curriculum kind of passes over that, or just like is like a tiny glimpse of what like civil rights or slavery or something like that is. You're not learning about like the foundation of what America was like built on.
We spent months learning about these topics. You spend years, like you learn about like things gradually. But
Yeah.
these folks are like gonna drop the bomb, maybe not even drop the bomb, maybe a few hints here and there. It's like excluding a big chunk of history.
I was just gonna mention, like, I found an article that was like at the beginning of the month from February, was one of the Utah schools was wanting to have an option where parents are able to opt out their student from Black History Month, and then out of the whole curriculum, I'm like, how can you do that? Like, what?
No, I saw that. Like, I saw that study while like looking like this stuff up and like figuring out, trying to answer that question from earlier. And it's like, excuse me, they're missing out a big chunk of our history because that is a crucial, important part that needs to be taught. And this is my opinion, but it should be taught everywhere. Everywhere in America too, because there's a lot of people, even a lot of people like outside of the country know more.
Yeah,
They surprisingly do.
While they should get educated and they should be teaching this stuff, they probably themselves did not get taught when they were young as well. So it's like being a cycle that's hard to break if you never say you never leave your town. You're just stuck where you are and you don't have that outside information, or you reject that outside information because of the environment where you grow up in. It's hard to break what you've known for all your life.
Yeah. It's interesting that you like mentioned that because it reminds me of like Khrislenn and I are in AP Gov. I don't know if you guys have learned this yet, Jayden, but like political socialization and like how you end up like developing your beliefs, your values and all that stuff, right? But like you said, like a lot of it comes from like family, right? And school is like the only formal way that you learn about it. So like informal would be family, friends, relationships, media, et cetera, et cetera. If you're like taking that formal way out of like learning about like trying to develop your beliefs and you're taking, and like if this isn't a part of it, because it's like you're an American, you should learn about this.
What I was going to mention was I watched that debate about the Confederate flag.
The high school debate?
I watched the whole thing. And it was pretty good. Like the points they mentioned was pretty good, but one of the points was how one of the guys met with the professor and he was saying it was something about biases. One of the other students mentioned how whatever that guy said, it could have been a bias as well in history that he's telling this one student. I believe like the way that teachers are teaching history is mostly by bias and by state, because the way we learn certain things is depending on who takes what bias. And I kind of agree on that. What I've learned, because I've had Mr. K for history all 3 years.
Yes.
He's very open with what side is which, because he's mentioned both sides for certain things as well, because you guys had him for AP Euro as well, where he had to mention different sides of multiple things. Like he described the sides of what was happening in America and what was happening in Great Britain, just to make it like seem like into one, so we know what we're talking about all together. But that history is just mostly bias, I guess. That's my whole idea of history.
No, but like I get it. Like we literally, like you said, or like the kids, the high schoolers at that time argued, like whoever source it was from, you or from the video. Of like it's obviously state, because the state has the curriculum. Like obviously the teachers are gonna like do their own thing, right? Because they gotta put their own twist into it, their own teacher twist. But this study is a good example of like how it is based on state, because like you have New York 150 pages and then you got Delaware 5 pages. Like that's a big blows my mind.
And like I was just gonna mention how like schools in general also like learn different things, because like I have cousins in Westmore who learn differently compared to here at Terra Nova, where we learn different things as well. So it's very shocking. And I also heard like Burlingame, they have different views on things, even though if it's, I don't know, less than an hour away from Terra Nova. I don't remember where Burlingame is, but like still.
No, right. It's like we compare the learning gap between people out there. We do have to look at it at a school to school basis. I mean, there are different levels of where people stand, but a lot of it does come from family views. And that's pretty much not always, but a lot of the times it's passed on, family member, or if you're talking to your friends, maybe you can have differing views from your parents, but you're talking to your friends and you guys have your political beliefs,
Or just beliefs.
right? Or just beliefs, if you choose to look at it and do your own research, that definitely also changes your mindset on certain things, the level of research, the credibility of what you're.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yes. Crazy stuff, guys. I can't. Oof.
But you know what? If you guys, listeners, tigers,
Whoever.
people,
People.
if you have no like idea how to celebrate or how to learn about Black History Month, well, let me tell you, okay? And you don't just have to do it in February. You got to do it every month. Learn something new.
All the time.
Yeah, you can support a Black business, donate to a Black organization, read a book from a Black author, explore Black music, call out racism in your community.
Period.
And educate yourself.
But also fact check everything, make sure it's all correct, because
Yeah, it doesn't matter which side you're on, make sure you're fact checking. Because either way, a lot of the media is meant to gear toward the views you already have. Because they just want to feed it to you more because you just eat it all up, Fact checking is very important.
I know there's some movies to remember some historical moments and other Black movies. And these are like two of my favorites, which are Hidden Figures and 13th. I love them both so much. Hidden Figures is so good. And 13th is such a great documentary, though.
I haven't watched Hidden Figures, I don't think.
I haven't watched it either. I've been meaning to.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna watch it. We're gonna watch it one day together.
Shame on us. But 13, we watched that during class.
I am so glad the English department showed us that movie.
Yeah, that was a good call.
Honestly. Because then it get like super popular.
We watched it before it blew up everywhere.
Yeah. And it was like, oh, I know that. Yes.
And I think what was shocking too is like it was made in 2016 or something like that.
Yeah.
Super high production and super informative. Like,
yeah, I learned a lot. I think with 13th especially, it's different like reading things online or like seeing pictures. Instead you are looking at real people who were impacted, and you can see it with your eyes, you can hear it. And it definitely leaves more of an impact than just reading an article online.
With 13th, it starts with a timeline and then gets to modern day. And the modern day part was just so shocking to see because it started with Donald Trump rallies that were in 2016 or 2015. Or like it ended with that for the modern day. And it was just shocking to see like the connection between from the beginning of this whole timeline to now.
The parallels, because they do talk about the parallels a lot. Or like instead of abolishing things, you're passing things that are basically the same but in a different font. 13th is good. Now, let me talk about Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman, you guys better know him.
Yeah.
I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
Learning Black history should not be limited to only a month out of the year. And it's not just Black history, as he said, Black history is American history, which I think is really relevant when we're also talking about like the education gap between different places.
Yep.
Yeah.
Black history is not just Black history. It's a part
Yeah.
of America, guys.
Yeah.
It's American history.
Exactly. So like, now I understand why we talked about a lot of Black figures and a lot of that when you're a push. Like now
Yeah.
back, I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I know why we talked about it so much.
Yep.
And I think our history department does a really good job at this, which is they mentioned all types of history, like LGBTQ plus history, as well as Black history. And they do it throughout the whole year, not just on the months.
Exactly.
Inclusive all school year, which I can appreciate. Yes.
Yeah. Shout
Yeah.
out. Shout out to our history department
Yes.
and our English department because they
Yes.
both do
Yes.
very good job of teaching us, or at least what I learned from like having a push and AP Lang about learning about Black history, mass incarceration, all that stuff. They did a very good job educating.
Yes.
Yes.
Honestly, I don't think I would know or be as socially aware of it if I had in those classes.
I think it's like more of a modern thing because I'm taking film class right now, and the book we're reading is called Heart of Darkness, and we're trying to connect it to modern day, and we're like, I don't see it. But then Schneider, the film teacher, was able to help like a lot of us figure out like the connection between modern day.
Like how you mentioned, teachers are definitely the bridge between making those connections. They don't spell it out for you, but they're there to guide you.
Yeah.
Because if someone just handed me those documents junior year without like Miss Meskin there, I would have been like, hold up. Or if like we're in a push, Lindsay just dropped all the notes and dipped, I would have been like, hold on a second.
Excuse me.
Hold on a second. But they definitely do a great job of connecting everything.
I know another thing that was mentioned like yesterday because we talked about it a few days ago was the example of like American. So, for example, I'm Filipino American.
Right.
And there's African Americans, there's Hispanic Americans, Latino Americans, so much more. I haven't heard European American, but I'm pretty sure that's a thing. But
I've never heard that until recently.
Everywhere else in the world, they call themselves by their countries, like.
Or it's like if you're like your race is like some other than like white, they're not like, oh, you're like Irish, etc. You're just Irish, Swedish, or whatever.
Whatever.
In other countries, they don't mention your ethnicity and your nationality. It's usually like, say if I was born in Australia, maybe some people say like Filipina Australian. Most people would just say Australian. I think also growing up in America, it also makes sense why we do include our ethnicity because we want that on top of being American. It's like showcasing your heritage.
When like people ask me, they're like, oh, like what are you or whatever, and I'm like, I don't tell them I'm like Latina, Hispanic, American. I'm like, oh, I'm just a Latina. I mean, like, I'm born here. That should say enough. And then I got Mexican, Guatemalan blood in me.
Yeah, if like a fellow American is asking, what are you?
I just say Filipino.
Yeah, I'm Filipino, guys. Haha, if you didn't know already. I mean, when would you say you're Filipino American or blah 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 American?
I feel like if somebody else that wasn't from America, wasn't from the United States, sorry, would ask me that, I'm like, oh. If it's like somebody from like another country, I'm like, oh, I'm Latin American.
Right.
I feel like.
But I don't need nobody in America needs to. I just tell them, mom's from Mexico, dad's from Guatemala, and I'm born here. There you go.
Yep.
I never say the American in general, anyways.
Same.
Even if someone asks me, I would just say, oh, I'm Filipino. I just don't say Filipino American, even like if someone had to ask me that.
I mean, I feel like it's because it's already implied that you're American.
Yeah.
Can't really add the American part. I mean, you could, but like, you don't have to. I only really see like blah 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 American in like articles.
Honestly. Or just media. I don't know. What's that about? Exactly. What up, media?
Now moving on to our golden moments. Heidi, start us off.
Okay. So my golden moment would be, it's not gonna happen yet, but there's this cross necklace on Macy's.com that I really want to buy. And it's like a sapphire, it's all black, really cute. That's my golden moment because it went on sale.
Hey, I think my golden moment would have to be realizing I got accepted to all my state schools.
Yay.
I was happy about that. I
Woo!
was like shocked because the Fullerton, I really thought it was going to be harder for me because it has like, hold on, let me check. I think it has a really low acceptance rate. Not low, but like, you know,
Higher than like all the other ones.
Yeah.
Kinda. Good. Period.
It's 52.7% acceptance rate.
Compared to like SF State, it's like 70, right?
Yeah, I mean, like SF State's
A few others,
70,
too.
San Jose, it's like, what is San Jose?
Mm.
63.6.
You got in the San Jose.
I got into San Jose. So all the state schools that I got accepted to were SF State, Sonoma State, San Jose, and Fullerton.
Period.
Really was believing I wouldn't get accepted to one of them, but I got accepted to all of them.
King! Yes, involved king, doing the most.
Mhm.
Now we praying for our UCs.
100% praying.
I'm gonna think about it.
Same.
Anyways, my golden tiger moment was my mom made spaghetti for me last night. Filipino spaghetti.
Really?
Filipino spaghetti is so good.
Y'all
Yes.
are sleeping on Filipino spaghetti.
And that was it for this episode on Black History Month. Woo! Yes. Next week, we will be continuing our What is Love series. The final and the second episode.
Second and final episode.
Second and final.
Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Peace out, Homeschool.